Welcome to lesson 10-6, more adding and subtracting mixed numbers. Our learning goal will be to add and subtract mixed numbers. Other learning goals for this lesson will be that we will solve more complex problems involving addition and subtraction of mixed numbers. We will use order of operations to solve addition and subtraction of mixed numbers. There's no new vocabulary for this lesson, so we'll go right into our example. Clarice has 2 lengths of fabric to make covers for a sofa and a chair. The green fabric measures 7 5/6 yards, and the yellow fabric is 5 3/4 yards. The covers require 9 2/3 yards of fabric to make. How much fabric will Clarice have left over? This is a multi-step word problem. We will first add the total amounts of green and yellow fabric because that's how much she has total to use. Then we will subtract that amount from the total amount needed to complete the project. So we know that she needed 9 2/3 yards of fabric to complete the covers for both the sofa and the chair. So we're going to see what that difference is. So here's an example of that. You would add to find out how much fabric Clarice has in all, so you'd add the 5 3/4 and the 7 5/6. They have unlike denominators, so we'd find that common denominator, which we use 12. If you'll notice, we ended up with the fraction of 12 and 19/12. 19/12 is an improper fraction, so then we changed that to 13 7/12. So we took the 12/12 from the 19/12. We realized that made 1, so we added 1 to 12 to make 13, and that left us with 7/12 left over. So her total yellow and green fabric was 13 7/12 yards. That was the first part of the problem we needed to complete. Now we have to subtract the amount she will use, which is 9 2/3 yards from the total length of fabric. So we have her 13 7/12, and we're subtracting 9 2/3. Again, we use 12 as our common denominator, but you'll notice whenever we did that, we had to change that back to the 12 and 19/12 in order to be able to subtract. And we're going to do some examples of these in our practice problems today, so you get to practice that. That leaves us with 3 11/12 yards of fabric that Clarice has left over. So let's go right into our practice problems. Here's an example practice problem that is not in word form, but it does require us to go back and remember our order of operations to solve. So we have 12 4/7 plus 2 3/14 in parentheses. Whenever we have that in parentheses, we know we have to work that portion of the problem first. Once we get the answer to the portion in parentheses, then we'll subtract 2 6/14. So go ahead and try this problem on your own. Press pause while you do that and press play when you're ready to check your work with mine. Okay, did you get 12 5/14? Well, let's work this problem out step by step. So we have the 12 4/7. So, sometimes we like to write these the way they are here, which is horizontal. Sometimes we like to write them vertical, and I'll do a little bit of both. So we have 12 4/7, and then we're adding 2 3/14. And we've been doing this kind of work for a while, so we know whenever we add fractions, we have to find a common denominator. I know that 14 would be a good common denominator because then I don't have to do anything to this fraction. So 2 3/4 is going to stay the same, or 3/14. Now in order to change my denominator to 14, I had to multiply this times 2. And I write it like this, but you can also write it as a fraction with a line right there. So this becomes 8/14. So now I have 12 8/14 and 2 3/14, which I can now add. So I'm going to get 11/14 on this side for my fraction. So now I have 14 11/14. Now I have to work with this portion, which is a subtraction problem. So now I'm going to subtract the 2 6/14 and They have the same denominator, so I don't need to do anything there. I can just subtract. So I'm going to get 5/14, and then my whole numbers, when I subtract those, I will get 12, and this is my final answer, 12 and 5/14. Let's go ahead and take a look at practice problem number 2. For practice problem 2, we have 10 and 5/16, and we're subtracting 5 and 1/4 plus 2 and 9/16. Again, think about order of operations. What are you going to need to do first to solve this problem? Pause and press play when you're ready to check your work with mine. Did you get 2 and 1/2? Well, let's work this out together. All right, so we have to work what's in parentheses first. So I have 5 and 1/4, and I'm subtracting 2 and 9/16. Oh, I'm actually adding those. So I realize that 16 would be a great denominator for both of those. I can keep this fraction the same. So now I'm going to keep that as 2 and 9/16. In order to change my denominator into 16, I had to multiply that by 4. Anything you do to the top of the bottom of the fraction, the denominator, you do to the numerator. And so I changed that fraction now to 4/16. This is an addition problem, so I have 13/16, and then I add my whole numbers together, so I get 7 and 13/16. Now I have to take care of my subtraction. So I'm going to come over here. I have 10 and 5/16, and I'm subtracting 7 and 13/16. Now this is very much like our example problem. My numerator is smaller here than it is here. I can't take away 13 from 5. So I've really got to regroup this number so that I can do the subtraction. So the way that we do that is I want to take one whole away from 10 and make it 9. Now, from what I know about fractions, the one whole that I've taken away would be equal to, oops, part of my 9 disappeared, 16/16. So if I have 9 and 16/16, that has the same value as 10. But I'm making the 10 into 9, and I'm going to move the 16/16 over here, and I'm going to add it to, oops, let me try that again, 16/16. And if I add 5/16 and 16/16, I'm going to get 21/16. So 9 and 21/16 is equivalent to 10 and 5/16. I've just changed this back into an improper fraction. Now I can subtract my 13/16 from that, and I would get 8/16. And then I come over here and subtract my whole numbers, so I get 2 and 8/16, but that isn't the same answer as I have right here. Remember, I always need to have my answers in simplest form. So I would need to reduce this, and I could do that by dividing my numerator and denominator both by 8. It's a common factor that they share. And that would give me 2 and 1/2, which is my answer. Okay, so let's take a look at our practice word problem. So remember, in these we have to decide what operation we need to do and what math needs to happen first. The main ingredients in Connor's pumpkin bread recipe are 2 1/3 cup of flour, 3/4 of a cup of sugar, and 1.5 cups of canned pumpkin. How many more cups of, oops, this should say dry, not day, dry ingredients, flour and sugar, then wet ingredients, the canned pumpkin, go into Connor's pumpkin bread? So how many more dry ingredients than wet ingredients? Use the key words to help you know if you need to add or subtract in this problem, or if you need to do both, which one do you do first? Take a moment, pause, work this out, and press play whenever you are ready to check your answer with mine. All right, so our actual problem would look like this. We have to combine the total amount of dry ingredients first. So 2 1/3 cup plus 3/4 of a cup will tell us our dry, and then we have to subtract the wet ingredients to find out what the difference is. So again, I'm going to write this like this, and going to need to add. Anytime we add or subtract, we have to have a common denominator. I'm going to use 12. In order to change the 4 into a 12, I had to multiply it times 3. Anything I do to my denominator, I also have to do to the numerator. So I made an equivalent fraction of 9/12. Okay. Same thing here. I've got to multiply the 3 times 4. I have to do the same thing up here. So I just made an equivalent fraction. 1/3, an equivalent fraction of that was 4/12. Now I can add, and I'll get 13/12. I'm going to bring that 2 down for my whole number. This is my amount of dry ingredients. Right here I figured that out. Now I need to subtract the wet ingredients from my dry ingredients. And the wet ingredients were the canned pumpkin, which I had 1 1/2 cups. And now I need to do a subtraction problem. Again, I need a common denominator before I can go any further. 12 looks like that would be a good choice. Okay, this can stay exactly the same, 13/12. In order to change this into a 12, I had to multiply it by 6. Anything I do to my denominator, I also must do to the numerator. And I get 6/12. And that makes sense. 6/12 is equivalent to 1/2. Now I can go ahead and work the problem. So when I subtract my fraction, I get 7/12, and I get 1. And the difference in the dry and wet ingredients is 1 7/12 cup. All right, so we always want to label. So that's our final answer for the practice word problem. Let's take a look at our challenge. Emily spent 6 7/8 days working on her personal narrative, 3 1/6 days working on her art project, and 1 1/2 days studying for her math test. How many days more did Emily spend on her personal narrative and math test than on her art project? Solve and label your answer. So make sure that you go through this. Think about the skills that we have used in this lesson today. Think about order of operations. Think about multi-step problems. What would you need to do first to be able to solve? And then be sure and label your answer in your math journal. Let's finish up. Please review the learning goals. Do you have the learning goals written in your journal? Do you have the practice problems written in your journal? And do you have your challenge problem written in your journal? You've now completed lesson 10-6. Please enjoy your evening, and we'll see you in the morning.